7 American soldiers vanish after the Battle of Bastogne. Their 12-mile patrol walks out of camp and simply does not come back. 79 years later, a local farmer turns up a scene no map explains. 7 helmets laid in a perfect circle in the snow. Before they left, everything is ordinary: cold coffee, boot polish, a translator lifting his hand in a nervous farewell. Just another reconnaissance under orders. The discovery is wrong in the bones: helmets facing inward, rifles bent like broken promises. A carved wooden figure tucked into each shell. Investigators find a ledger, a translator's confession, and hints of an ancient compact that reads like mercy or mass betrayal. Did 7 broken men choose an end, or did they walk willingly into something that will make them sing beneath the roots forever? The forest doesn't care who wins the war. Staff Sergeant Marcus Elias Webb watched his breath cloud white in the air above him. 28 years old, Cedar Rapids farm boy, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt his toes. The thermometer nailed to the mess tent read -15 Fahrenheit at 0530 hours, December 27, 1944, 2 days after Christmas, 1 day after the siege lifted. The Boisjoc forest stretched ahead like a wall of black pines, branches sagging under 3 feet of snow. Somewhere in those woods, German artillery still waited. That's what Captain Winters told him. Scout the positions, report back by 1800 hours, simple reconnaissance. Nothing was simple anymore. Webb ran his thumb across the spade symbol painted on his helmet. Easy Company, 101st Airborne. They'd held Bastogne through hell itself: German shells, frozen bodies stacked like cordwood, men dying from cold as much as shrapnel. Now command wanted 7 more men walking into those trees. "Sergeant Webb?" Webb turned. Private First Class Walter Hines stood 3 feet away, too close, his pale face pinched with something that wasn't just cold. The translator always looked nervous, but this morning his dark eyes carried weight Webb couldn't name. "We're moving out in 5, Hines. You got something?" "I wanted to." Hines swallowed. His accent thickened when he was anxious, Milwaukee German bleeding through Army English. "I wanted—" Webb couldn't hear. Probably German. Probably prayer. The man carried a Bible thick as a brick. "Good luck, Sergeant." Hines released his grip and stepped back. "I'll pray for your safe return." Webb nodded and turned toward where the rest of the patrol waited. 6 men, stomping feet against frozen ground, rifles slung across white camouflaged parkas. Corporal James Donnelly, Jimmy to everyone, breathed into his cupped hands. Boston kid, 22, talked too much before Bastogne and barely spoke now. His eyes carried that 1,000-yard stare Webb recognized from his own shaving mirror. Private First Class Robert Chen checked his rifle's action for the 3rd time. San Francisco Chinatown, careful and precise. His hands hadn't stopped shaking since Noville. Webb pretended not to notice. Private Eugene Lafayette hummed something low and mournful. New Orleans jazz translated to frozen Belgian forest. 19 years old enough to die. Private Samuel Kowalski kicked snow off his boots. Pittsburgh steelworker's son, built like an ox, moved like he was carrying weight that wasn't just gear. Private Thomas Brightwater stood perfectly still, watching the tree line. Oklahoma Cherokee, 23, spoke less than Jimmy now, and that was saying something. His grandfather fought Apaches. He fought Germans. The symmetry wasn't lost on anyone. Private David Rosen adjusted his pack straps. Brooklyn, 20, rabbinical student before Pearl Harbor. Kept kosher until the rations made it impossible. Kept faith anyway. 7 men. Good men. Broken men. Webb glanced back once. Hines stood in the exact spot, watching. Behind him, other soldiers moved through morning routines. Coffee, cigarettes, the small rituals that made the war survivable, normal. Hines looked like he was at a funeral. "Let's move," Webb said. The forest swallowed sound. Webb had noticed it during the siege, how the pines dampened explosions, made artillery seem farther away than it was. Now, with his patrol crunching through knee-deep snow, the silence felt deliberate, hungry. He shook the thought away. 3 weeks of combat did things.
Patterns. December 25th. Carl swears he heard American voices deep in the pines. We were the only patrol. December 26th. Something isn't right about the Jacques Woods. Trees feel wrong. Webb clicked his pen and wrote, December 27th, 0730 hours. Chen and Brightwater report hearing voices. No acoustic signature confirms. He snapped the notebook shut and pushed forward. By noon, they'd covered 6 miles. The route should have taken them through recently secured territory. Forest the Germans evacuated when the siege broke. Clean terrain. Instead, the snow lay perfect and undisturbed. No tank tracks, no boot prints, no shell craters. Like no one had ever been here. Donnelly stopped to relieve himself behind a tree. When he came back, his face was gray. "Jimmy, you all right?" "Yeah, Sarge, just..." Donnelly's Boston accent thickened. "Had a dream last night. We were all standing in a circle, right here in these woods. We were smiling." Lafayette looked up sharply. "I had that dream." "Me too," Kowalski said. Webb felt ice that had nothing to do with temperature. "What kind of circle?" "Clearing," Lafayette said. "Perfectly round. We were arranged around something, can't remember what, but we were happy. First time I felt happy since we got to this frozen shithole." Chen nodded slowly. "I dreamed it 3 nights running." Rosen crossed himself. Wrong religion, but the gesture transcended denominations. "The circle called us by name." Webb opened his mouth to tell them dreams were just dreams, combat stress, exhaustion playing tricks. But Brightwater spoke first. "It's not on the map," the Cherokee private said, "but I know where it is." "What?" Brightwater pointed northeast, off their designated route, deeper into the forest. 1.5 miles that direction. I can feel it. We don't deviate from... "I can feel it too," Chen interrupted. "Like it's pulling." Webb looked at his men. Every single one stared northeast. Their faces carried something he hadn't seen since before Bastogne. Not quite hope, but something close to peace. "We have orders," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Marcus." Donnelly never used his first name. "Please." Almost glowing in the weak afternoon light. "Jesus," Kowalski whispered. Webb felt it too. The pull. Like standing at the edge of deep water, knowing you shouldn't dive, but wanting to anyway. "This is it," Lafayette said. "From the dreams." They stood at the circle's edge, 7 men in a line, and Webb realized with distant horror that they'd unconsciously spaced themselves evenly. Equidistant, like points on a compass. "We should head back," he said. His voice sounded far away. "Do you hear it?" Rosen asked. Webb did, singing. Wordless but familiar. The melody felt like coming home after years away, like his mother's voice calling him in from fields at sunset, like every good memory compressed into sound. "It's beautiful," Chen said. Brightwater stepped forward into the circle. Then Donnelly. Then Lafayette. "Wait," Webb started, but Kowalski was moving too, and Rosen, and Chen, and Webb's own feet carried him forward without conscious decision. They arranged themselves in a circle, exactly as in the dreams. The singing grew louder. Not external, internal. Rising from the ground beneath their boots, thrumming through bone and blood and brain. Webb tried to speak, to order retreat, but his lips moved to form different words. Old words. The words Hines had whispered when he gripped Webb's hand that morning. All 7 men spoke them in perfect unison. The forest listened. The singing became language, and the language became understanding. And the understanding was this. They were tired. They'd fought beyond endurance. The war would break them if they stayed. But the circle offered something else. Not death, not life, but ending, and peace, and release. We were always meant to come home. They understood, and the woods took them, gentle and certain as sleep. The search party moved through the forest at first light, 23 men from Easy Company's 2nd Platoon strung in a loose skirmish line across the snow. Their breath rose in white plumes that hung suspended in the frozen air before dissipating into the gray dawn. The temperature had climbed to -8 Fahrenheit, which the men considered a mercy. Private First Class Walter Hines walked of the pines. Above them, the sky was the color of old steel, pregnant with the promise of more snow. Lieutenant Buck Compton, leading the search from 2nd Platoon in the absence of any senior officers, checked his map against the coordinates Captain Winters had provided. The patrol's route should have taken them through this sector sometime around 07:30 yesterday morning. 7 men walking in single-file formation should have left an obvious trail. Compressed snow, disturbed branches, the small signs of human passage through wilderness. They found nothing. Hines's hands trembled inside his gloves. He'd volunteered immediately when Winters called for searchers, pushing himself to the front of the line before anyone else could speak. The other men had noticed. Private David Kenyon Webster, walking 3 positions to Hines's right, kept glancing over with an expression somewhere between concern and suspicion. "I have to find them," Hines told himself. "I have to see what the circle did. I have to know if it was mercy or damnation." The search line reached a small clearing where the patrol's route map showed a waypoint, a junction where they should have turned northeast toward the village of Foy. The snow here lay 3.5 feet deep, perfectly level except where wind had sculpted small drifts against the trunks of the surrounding trees. "Hold up," Compton called. The line stopped. "This is checkpoint 2 on their route. They should have passed through here no later than 0800 yesterday." The men spread out slightly, examining the clearing from different angles. Looking for anything. Finding nothing. "No tracks," Webster said quietly. "Not even old ones, snowed over. It's like they never came through here at all." Hines's breath caught. His vision blurred at the edges. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to maintain the appearance of calm. But inside his chest, his heart hammered against his ribs like something trapped and desperate to escape. The circle wasn't on their route map, he thought. It wouldn't have been. The old one said it reveals itself only to those who've been called, to those who've spoken the words. Maybe they deviated from the planned route, Guarnier suggested, his voice tight with frustration. Spotted something, went to investigate. 7 experienced men wouldn't all go off route without Webb radioing it in, Compton replied. Line had to compress, men bunching together to navigate the narrow gaps between trunks. Hines felt the forest watching. Not the German army. They'd pulled back to defensive positions beyond Foix, leaving this sector essentially uncontested. No, this was something else. Something that lived in the spaces between the trees, beneath the frozen earth, in the silence that fell when human voices stopped. The compact, Deralta had called it, the old agreement. 7 souls offered willingly, and in return the forest's hunger is satisfied. The rest of your men will pass through unharmed. Around 1100 hours, the search party reached the farthest point of the patrol's planned route, a low ridgeline overlooking the approaches to Foix, where German artillery positions should have been visible. Through the trees, they could see smoke rising from the village, evidence of ongoing American bombardment. Still nothing. No sign that Webb's patrol had ever reached this point. "All right," Compton said, his voice heavy with defeat. "We sweep back toward the line. Wider spacing this time. Check any area we might have missed." The return journey took 4 hours. The men moved slowly now, exhaustion and cold seeping into their bones, the futility of the search weighing on them. They found a rusted German helmet, half buried in snow. They found the frozen corpse of a Wehrmacht soldier who died weeks earlier, his body preserved by the sub-zero temperatures, his dead eyes staring at nothing. They found shell fragments and abandoned ammunition crates and all the normal detritus of a contested battlefield. But they found no trace of Marcus Webb or his 6 men. As the winter sun began its early descent, casting long shadows through the pine forest, Hines lagged behind the searchline. The other men pressed ahead, eager to return to whatever warmth awaited at Battalion HQ. Hines stopped at the edge of a particularly dense thicket, staring into the gloom between the trees. He could feel it out there, the circle, the place where he'd sent them with his whispered words and his Judas handshake. It was close, perhaps a half-mile from where he stood, but it would never reveal itself to a search party. The Old One had been clear about that. It shows itself only to those who are called. Only said simply as Compton approached. "Nothing, sir. No tracks, no signs of combat, no indication they ever traveled their assigned route." Compton's voice carried the weight of failure. "It's like they vanished before they even left our lines." Winters's jaw tightened. He looked past Compton to the exhausted search party, his gaze lingering for a moment on Hines, who stood slightly apart from the others, his head down. "Get your men fed and warm," Winters said quietly. "We'll mount another search at first light if the weather holds." But they wouldn't find anything tomorrow either. Hines knew this with absolute certainty. The forest had accepted its payment. The compact was sealed. 7 men had walked into the circle and ceased to exist in any way that mattered to the world of living soldiers and official reports. That night, unable to sleep, Hines sat in a corner of the barn that served as enlisted quarters, a small notebook open on his knees, writing by the light of a guttering candle. His hand shook as he formed the words in German, the language of his parents, the language that felt appropriate for confession. Second search found nothing. The others are beginning to accept what I already know. The 7 are gone beyond recovery, but they do not understand how gone. They think of death. They think of German prisoners or frozen corpses waiting to be discovered in spring. They do not think of things older than the war, of bargains struck in languages that predate Latin, of entities that feed not on flesh, but on the act of willing sacrifice itself. He paused, the pen hovering over the page. In the darkest corner of his mind, a question had been growing since the moment he'd spoken those ancient syllables to the 7 men. What if Deralta lied? What if the circle isn't mercy but something far worse? Hines closed his eyes, remembering the old man's face in the shadows of the forest 3 days ago, those eyes that seemed to have witnessed centuries, that voice that carried harmonics of something profoundly inhuman. "The forest offers peace to those who can no longer bear witness to suffering," Deralta had said. "Your 7 friends will know no more pain, no more fear. They will simply continue, forever, feeding the old roots with their consciousness, their souls preserved in amber beneath the earth, dreaming the forest's dreams, calling out in voices no living ear can hear. And I put them there." Across the barn, someone coughed. Boots scuffed against the wooden floor. The normal sounds of sleeping soldiers, men who would wake tomorrow and continue the war, who would eventually go home to their families and their normal lives. But not Marcus Webb, not Jimmy Donnelly or Robert Chen or Eugene Lafayette or Samuel Kowalski or Thomas Brightwater or David Rosen. They would never go home. They had gone somewhere else entirely. Somewhere Hines had sent them. Catherine Webb's kitchen smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. The yellow Formica table, scarred by 60 years of use, held neat stacks of correspondence she'd organized by decade. Outside her Cedar Rapids bungalow, January snow fell past windows where frost gathered in familiar patterns. She was 35 years old the first time she wrote to the Department of the Army. The linoleum had been new then, bright red checkerboard that matched her optimism. Now the linoleum was cracked gray, and Catherine was 95. Her hands, knotted with arthritis, smoothed the latest form letter across the table. "We regret that no new information regarding Staff Sergeant Marcus Elias Webb has been located in Army records. His sacrifice is honored by a grateful nation." The same words they'd sent in 1955, 1963, 1977, 1989, and every 5 years since when she renewed her appeals. The signature was digital now instead of ink, but the bureaucratic dismissal remained identical. Catherine adjusted her reading glasses and picked up her pen. The arthritis made writing painful, but she'd learned to work through pain decades ago. January 14th, 2023. Dear Records Administrator, I am writing regarding my brother, Staff Sergeant Marcus E. Webb, service number 37042589, listed as KIA/body not recovered, December 27, 1944, near Bastogne, Belgium. The pen moved in familiar grooves. She'd written this letter so many times she could compose it while her mind wandered to other things. To Marcus, teaching her to ride a bicycle behind their father's barn. Marcus reading her letters at mail call, his face lighting up at news from home. Sent form letters. Sergeant Thompson. The voice was young, female, uncertain. This is Catherine Webb. You left a message. Yes, ma'am, Miss Webb. I need to ask, when was the last time you received communication from our office? 3 weeks ago. The same letter I've gotten for 68 years. Silence on the line. Catherine heard papers rustling, a muffled conversation with someone else in the room. Miss Webb, I'm going to transfer you to the European Recovery Division. They've requested to speak with you directly. Can you hold? Catherine sat down. Her kitchen tilted slightly. Yes. The hold music was Brahms, incongruously gentle. Catherine stared at the half-finished letter on her table while her heart performed complicated arrhythmias her cardiologist had warned about. Don't get excited, Catherine. You've had false alarms before. The dog tags found in a French attic that belonged to a different Webb. The helmet dug up near Normandy with the wrong division markings. A man's voice came on the line, older, careful. Miss Webb, this is Colonel James Reardon, Director of European Recovery Operations. I'm calling from our office in Brussels. Has something happened to my brother? The question was automatic, absurd. Marcus had been dead for 79 years. Ma'am, we've received notification from Belgian authorities regarding a discovery made yesterday near Bastogne. I need to stress that we're in preliminary stages of investigation, but physical evidence has been recovered that may be connected to your brother's patrol. Catherine's vision narrowed to a tunnel. What kind of evidence? Personal effects, ma'am. Military equipment. The site is being secured by Belgian Federal Police and our liaison team. We're arranging for forensic analysis and positive identification protocols. The colonel's voice carried the practiced cadence of someone delivering terrible news gently. Miss Webb, do you have someone who can be with you right now? I've been alone since 1944, Colonel. I'm well practiced. Her voice came out sharper than intended. What did they find? Another pause. Helmets, ma'am. 7 M1 helmets marked with the 101st Airborne's insignia. Along with other items we're still cataloging. The discovery was made by a local contact information for our casualty assistance officer and details about traveling to Belgium if you choose to do so. If I choose? Catherine laughed, a sound like tearing paper. Colonel, I've waited 79 years. I understand, ma'am, but I need to prepare you. The site shows evidence of deliberate arrangement. This isn't a battlefield scatter pattern. The items were placed, not dropped during combat. We may be looking at circumstances that raise difficult questions. Catherine thought about Marcus's last letter, the one that arrived in February 1945, postmarked December 20th. Cat, I had the strangest dream last night. I saw you in the barn, all grown up, your hair white. You were holding this letter and crying, but they were good tears somehow, like you'd finally gotten an answer to something. I woke up feeling peaceful. That's rare these days. She'd never told anyone about that letter. It felt too private, too strange. I'm 95 years old, Colonel. Whatever questions you have, I promise you I've already asked them myself 1,000 times. When can I come to Belgium? The colonel's voice gentled further. Let us complete the preliminary work first, ma'am. I'll have our casualty officer contact you within 48 hours. In the meantime, is there anything immediate you need? I need my brother back. I need to understand why the war took him but left me here, waiting. No, Colonel.
Thank you for calling. After she hung up, Catherine sat in her kitchen while the winter light faded to blue twilight. The form letter lay on the table beside her unfinished appeal, both suddenly obsolete. On the wall above the table hung a framed photograph. Easy Company, 1944. Marcus standing in the back row, with that crooked smile that never quite reached his eyes after Normandy. She studied the faces around him. Donnelly, the Boston boy who wrote poetry in his spare time. Chen, whose letters home to San Francisco were works of art. Lafayette from New Orleans. Kowalski from Pittsburgh. Brightwater with his Cherokee prayers. Rosen, who argued theology with anyone who'd listen. 7 faces she'd memorized over 8 decades of wondering. The overnight package arrived at 9 the next morning. Catherine signed for it with shaking hands and spread the... Exhausted, stretched past breaking. Lafayette cries in his sleep. Chen's hands shake when he thinks no one's looking. I catch myself staring at nothing for hours. We have orders to scout Foy tomorrow. Simple reconnaissance, they say, but nothing's simple anymore. I keep thinking about that dream I wrote Kat about being at peace. These woods whisper about peace too, in their way, like they're offering something. The entry ended there, mid-thought. Catherine read it 17 times before she noticed the note paper-clipped to the photocopy. Additional pages recovered, full documentation being processed. Some content may be disturbing. Colonel Reardon. She called her neighbor's grandson, a patient young man who helped with her computer. Within an hour, she'd booked a flight to Brussels, departing in 3 days, purchased travel insurance, and arranged for a medical travel companion through her doctor's office. Her cardiologist protested. International travel at 95 with her heart condition invited disaster. Catherine packed anyway. She'd spent 79 winters waiting. Whatever waited in that Belgian forest, whatever truth lay in that circle of helmets, she would meet it standing up. On the flight, she dreamed of Marcus for the first time in years. He stood in a snow-covered clearing surrounded by pines that grew twisted and strange. 6 other soldiers stood with him in a perfect circle, their faces peaceful. They weren't speaking, but Catherine heard singing anyway, in a language that felt older than words. Marcus looked at her and smiled, that real smile from before the war. He mouthed something she couldn't quite hear over the singing. It looked like, "I chose this, Cat. We all did." She woke as the plane descended toward Brussels, her face wet with tears she didn't remember crying, carrying questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Below, invisible in the winter darkness, the Bois Jacques forest waited. 7 helmets arranged in a circle. 7 souls fed to something ancient. And 1 old woman who'd spent a lifetime refusing to stop asking why. The excavator's halogen work lights carved harsh shadows across the frozen clearing, turning the circle of helmets into something from a fever dream. Philippe Mercier stood back, arms crossed tight against the cold, watching Belgian federal police officers move through the scene with the slow precision of men diffused. Heavy-set man with tired eyes crouched beside her. The rifles concern me more. She followed his gaze to the 7 M1 Garands arranged in the depression like the spokes of a wheel. Each barrel bent in an identical curve, the steel deformed with such force that the metal showed stress fractures. That takes strength, De Vries continued. Multiple men, working together, or working against something. Drummond stood, brushing frozen soil from her knees. The temperature had dropped since sunset. Her fingers ached inside her gloves. The forensic team worked in silence, photographing, measuring, cataloging. One of them, a young woman named Elise, carefully extracted something from the earth near the depression's edge. A small wooden figure, crudely carved, its arms raised skyward. 7, Elise called out. 1 inside each helmet. Drummond moved to the nearest helmet and peered inside. The wooden figure stared up at her with eyeless sockets. Rowan wood, she noted, not native to this part of Belgium. Someone had brought these here, carved with deliberate purpose. The letters came next. 14 of them, preserved in a waterproof pouch buried beneath the depression.
The forensic team's excitement rippled through the cold air as they opened each one carefully. The paper brittle but legible. "Dearest Mother," one began in careful script. "If you receive this, know that I am thinking of home." "Two from each soldier," Elise reported. The last letters they received before the patrol. "Why would they bury their mail?" DeVries asked. Drummond didn't answer. She was staring at a leather-bound Bible, water-stained but intact, recovered from the Depression's center. She opened it to the flyleaf where 7 names were inscribed in different handwriting. Marcus E. Webb, James M. Donnelly, Robert H. Chen, Eugene C. Lafayette, Samuel J. Kowalski, Thomas R. Brightwater, David L. Rosen. Each signature matched the soldiers' service records. She'd memorized those records on the flight from Brussels. 7 men who'd walked into these woods on December 27, 1944, and vanished so completely that even their bones had never been found. Until now. Agent Drummond, the forensic...
Another degree. Hines, Walter P. 1606-7234, P. Lutheran. Who is Walter Hines? DeVries asked. Not one of the missing patrol. Drummond's mind raced through the service records, pulling up the name from the footnotes, the addendums, the classified sections. He was a translator, attached to Easy Company. Was he on the patrol? No. He was the last person to see them alive. She turned the dog tags over in her palm. Official records list him as a deserter, disappeared from a field hospital in January 1945. Peter had pulled the jacket free now, laying it carefully on a tarp. Something else fell from the inner pocket. Glossy paper that caught the halogen light with the unmistakable sheen of modern photo stock. Drummond picked it up with tweezers. A photograph. Color. High resolution. The kind of image that could only have been printed in the last few years. It showed an elderly man, perhaps in his late 90s, standing before a small alpine church. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but there was something in his posture, a military bearing that age hadn't erased. She turned the photograph over. Handwriting covered the back, shaky but deliberate. I kept my promise. The circle is closed. May God forgive what I could not prevent. When was this taken? DeVries leaned over her shoulder. Recently. Drummond held the photograph up to the light. See the clothing? The architectural details? This isn't 1944. So someone placed this jacket here. Recently. Very recently. She looked back at the circle of helmets, the arranged rifles, the wooden figures. Someone who knew where to find this clearing. Someone who knew what happened here. The forensic team worked through the night, but it was the ground-penetrating radar that delivered the final blow. The operator, a Dutch specialist named Vanderberg, ran his equipment across the circle 3 times before calling Drummond over. Look at this. He pointed to his screen where 7 dark masses showed beneath the surface, each positioned directly below where the helmets sat. Organic material. Degraded, but the density pattern suggests bodies, Drummond finished. Or what's left of them. First flight out of Cedar Rapids. She'll be in Brussels by noon your time. Tell her we found them. Drummond watched the sun struggle to penetrate the canopy. Tell her we're bringing her brother home. What else do I tell her? That was the question. What story could possibly explain this? 7 men, a ritual arrangement, wooden figures carved from Rowan, and a photograph from 2023 placed here by someone who knew exactly where these soldiers had died. Tell her the truth, Drummond said finally. We don't know what happened yet, but we're going to find out. She ended the call and turned back to the field jacket lying on the tarp. Walter Hines, translator, deserter, the last man to see the patrol alive, and apparently someone who'd survived the war long enough to deliver a confession 79 years later. DeVries appeared at her elbow with a thermos of coffee. What now? Now we find out if Walter Hines is still alive. Drummond accepted the coffee gratefully. And if he is, we ask him what the hell he did to those 7 men. The work lights hummed in the cold morning air. The circle of helmets stared inward, keeping their vigil, holding their secrets.
Somewhere beneath the frozen earth, 7 soldiers rested in whatever peace this strange ritual had granted them. But Sarah Drummond was going to disturb that peace. She was going to dig until she found the truth, no matter how deep it was buried or how much it didn't want to be found. The historical mystery had just become a murder investigation. Special Agent Sarah Mae Drummond stood in her office overlooking Rue de la Loi in Brussels, arranging photographs on a corkboard with methodical precision. 7 black and white army portraits formed a row across the top. Below them, a single color photo from her phone. The elderly man in front of the Alpine Church. Beside him, a grainy scan from the 1944 Easy Company roster. Private First Class, Walter Paul Hines, 24 years old, pale and serious-eyed. Victim or perpetrator? Inspector Luc de Vries asked from the doorway, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Both, maybe. Drummond accepted the coffee without looking away from the board. Or neither. That's what we need to find out. She'd spent the previous night reading preliminary reports until her vision blurred. 7 men vanish without a trace. 70
Buried in Belgian soil for 79 years, it should be degraded to rags. Instead, it looks like it's been in storage. And the photograph inside? Printed on modern glossy paper, Photolab dates the paper stock to 2020 or later. She tapped the image. The writing on the back matches samples of German script from Heinz's 1944 journals in Army archives. Same hand, just shakier, older. De Vries set down his coffee. So Heinz survived the war, lived somewhere, kept that jacket for 8 decades. Then, right before the discovery, he arranged to have it placed at the site. 6 days before the discovery, to be precise. Drummond moved to her laptop, pulling up the timeline she'd constructed. Heinz's Swiss death certificate lists December 10th. The helmets were found December 16th. Somebody collected his effects, transported that jacket to Belgium, and placed it at the Circle, all within less than a week. A partner? Or someone following Heinz's instructions? She clicked to a new document. I've been working with DPAA and the State Department. If Heinz entered Switzerland in 1945, there should be immigration records. The search had taken until 3 a.m., cross-referencing displaced persons databases with Swiss naturalization files. Most refugees from the war years had common surnames, Schmidt, Mueller, Weber, but the American Army's files on Walter Paul Heinz included specific biographical markers: birth date, birthplace, parents' names. I found him. Drummond pulled up a scanned document. Walter Heinrich. Note the spelling. 1 letter different. Born Milwaukee, Wisconsin, September 1920. Parents listed as Paul and Greta Heinrich, both German immigrants. He applied for Swiss refugee status in March 1945, claiming to be a German-American who deserted the Wehrmacht and feared Allied prosecution. Creative. De Vries leaned closer to the screen. The Swiss bought it? Switzerland was processing thousands of refugees. Heinrich, Heinz, spoke perfect German with a Milwaukee accent, which supported his cover story. They granted him status. She scrolled to another file. He naturalized as a Swiss citizen in 1952. After that, the trail gets thin. No marriage, no children, no property records in any 2023. De Vries whistled low. 103 years old. If the birth date's accurate, Drummond printed the document. I'm driving up there this afternoon. The Swiss Federal Police are coordinating with local authorities, but they've agreed to let me take the lead. You think someone in this village helped him? I think Heinz lived there for 78 years. Somebody knew him. Somebody knows what he did. She pulled the photograph of the Alpine Church from the board. And I'm betting this photo was taken in St. Wendelin. The drive took 4 hours, winding through valleys that grew narrower and steeper as Drummond's rental Audi climbed into the mountains. Snow clung to the peaks above the tree line. The forests here felt different from Belgium. Darker pines, older somehow, pressing close to the narrow highway. St. Wendelin appeared around a hairpin curve at 2:15 p.m. A cluster of wooden chalets and stone buildings huddled around a white church with a pointed steeple. Drummond slowed, checking the coordinates against her GPS.
The church in Heinz's photograph stood at the village center, exactly as she'd expected. She parked in a small lot near a general store. Two elderly men sitting on a bench watched her with open curiosity. American plates on a rental car probably stood out here. The local police station consisted of a single room attached to the municipal building. Officer Hans Keller, a man in his 50s with a graying mustache, greeted her in careful English. "Federal police said to expect you, Agent Drummond. You are investigating Walter Heinrich?" "I am." Drummond showed her credentials. "I understand he died here on December 10th. "Ja, at the clinic." Keller gestured toward a small medical building visible through the window. "He was very old, very sick. Heart failure, the doctor said." "How long had he lived in Sankt Wendelin?" Keller checked a ledger. The residence records show he registered with the village in 1946. He worked as custodian for the church for many years. Maybe 70 years. 70 years in one village, doing one job. Drummond felt the familiar tug of a pattern forming. Did he have family? Friends? No family that I know. He kept to himself mostly. Very rare. "Hear about Walter?" "I am." Drummond showed the photograph. "This was taken here, wasn't it? In front of this church." Brenner studied the image. "Last October, I took the picture myself. Walter asked me to. He said he wanted to send it to someone, to prove he had kept a promise." "Did he say who?" "No, but he gave me something else." Brenner walked to a side office, returning with a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. 2 months before he died, Walter asked me to mail this on December 15th. He gave me money for shipping and an address in Belgium, a post office box in Bastogne. Drummond's pulse quickened. "Did you look inside?" "No, he asked me not to, and I respected his wishes. I mailed it as he requested." Brenner set the box down. "But he left another box for me. He said I should give it to investigators when they came. He knew someone would come." The priest produced a second box, unsealed. Inside, Drummond found a collection of notebooks bound in leather, their pages dense with handwriting in German and English. Dozens of them, spanning decades. "His journals," Brenner said quietly. "He wrote every day. For as long as I knew him, he wrote. He said it was penance." Drummond carefully lifted the top journal. The pages were brittle, the ink faded but legible. He recognized dates from the 1940s, entries that referenced Bastogne, Easy Company. Names she knew. "Father, I need to take these with me. They're evidence in an active investigation." Brenner nodded slowly. "Walter told me you would say that. He said the journals would explain everything." He paused. "But he also said they would not make anything easier. He said the truth was worse than ignorance." By nightfall, Drummond sat in her hotel room in Chur, 30 kilometers from Sankt Wendelin, with the journals spread across the bed. She'd called De Vries, arranged for the boxes to be transported to Brussels as evidence, and skipped dinner in favor of strong coffee from the lobby. The earliest journal dated to 1946, Heinz's first year in Switzerland. The entries were structured like to a 2-lane road an hour ago. Now even that was narrowing, becoming something that barely qualified as paved. Sankt Wendelin, population 347. Elevation 1,843 meters. The village wasn't on most maps. Her GPS had needed 3 separate updates before it acknowledged the place existed. Pine forests pressed close on both sides, their branches heavy with yesterday's snow. The temperature gauge on the dashboard read -8 degrees Celsius. Drummond had left Brussels at dawn, driving through 5 hours of increasingly remote countryside. She'd passed the last gas station 40 minutes ago. The last town of any size, if you could call 300 people a town, had been Chur, where she'd stopped to brief the local cantonal police. The Swiss officer, Hans Keller, had been polite,
but clearly baffled by an American investigator asking about a church custodian who died 2 weeks ago. Herr Heinz was very old, Keller had said in careful English. Very quiet. He kept to himself, worked at the church, walked to the market on Tuesdays. No trouble, no visitors. When he didn't show for Sunday Mass, Father Brenner found him in his apartment. Natural causes, heart failure. The man was 103, born in 1920, which meant Walter Heinz had been 24 when 7 American soldiers walked into a frozen Belgian forest and never came back. Drummond's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen mounted on the dash. Text from Inspector de Vries in Brussels. Preliminary journal translation complete. You need to see this. Call when you can. The road leveled out, emerging from the tree line into a narrow mountain valley. Sankt Wendelin appeared like something from a postcard. A cluster of timber-framed buildings with steep-pitched roofs designed to shed snow, arranged around a stone church whose bell tower rose against the white peaks beyond. Smoke drifted from chimneys. A few cars sat in driveways, but she saw no people. She parked in the small lot beside the church and stepped out into air so cold it hurt to breathe. Her dress shoes crunched on packed snow. She should have worn boots. The church was 15th century, according to Keller. Weathered stone walls, narrow windows, a wooden door reinforced whitewashed walls. Father Brenner gestured to a worn sofa and disappeared into what must be the kitchen. He returned with 2 mugs of coffee so strong Drummond could smell it from across the room. "You have come about Walter," Brenner said, settling into an armchair. His English was better than Keller's, tinged with German formality. "I must confess, when Officer Keller explained why, I was shocked. Walter Heinz was a war criminal?" "That's what I'm trying to determine," Drummond said carefully. He sipped the coffee. It was bitter and perfect. "How long did you know him?" "I have been priest here for 32 years. Walter was already old when I arrived, in his 70s. But he was strong then, still working. He cleaned the church, tended the grounds, rang the bells for services." Brenner's expression softened. "He was a good man, Agent Drummond. Devout. He attended Mass every day, sometimes twice. He spoke little, but when he did, it was always kind." "Did he ever talk about the war? About his service?" Brenner shook his head. "Never. I knew he was American originally. His accent gave that away, though his German was excellent. But he would not discuss his past. When new parishioners asked, he would say only that he had left America long ago, and Switzerland was his home now." Drummond set down her coffee. "Father, I need you to understand something. 7 American soldiers disappeared in Belgium in December 1944. Walter Heinz was the last person to see them alive. We have evidence, physical evidence found at the site where those men died, that connects Heinz directly to their deaths. This isn't speculation." The priest's face paled. He crossed himself reflexively. "I'm not here to desecrate his memory," Drummond continued, "but I need to know everything. His habits, his routines, anything that seemed unusual." Brenner was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. He prayed for the dead. Every night, after evening Mass, he would stay in the church alone. I would see him kneeling in the front pew, his lips moving, but I could never hear what he said. One night, years ago, I asked him. He said he was praying for men he had failed, for forgiveness he did not deserve. Did he mention names? Never. But
Are the rest in storage at the church? But the priest hesitated. 2 months ago, Walter came to me with a request. It was unusual. He asked me to photograph him in front of the church. He had never wanted his picture taken before. He said it was important, that someone would need to see he had lived here, that this had been his home. Drummond's pulse quickened. "Did you take the photo?" "Yes, last October. He was very specific about where I should stand, what angle to use. Afterward, he thanked me and walked away. A few days later, he returned with another request, stranger still. He gave me a sealed wooden box and asked that I mail it to a post office box in Belgium. He was very clear. It must arrive on December 15th, 2023. Not before, not after. Did you ask why? I did. He said only that he was keeping a promise he had made 78 years ago, that he would not die without ensuring the truth was revealed. Drummond felt the pieces clicking into place. Father Brenner, I need to see those journals, all of them, and I need them transported to Brussels as evidence. The priest nodded slowly. Of course, but you should know, Walter was terrified at the end. His last weeks he barely slept. He would sit in the church at all hours, staring at the crucifix, weeping. Once, I heard him say something in English. He said, "They're still there, still conscious, still screaming," and I put them there. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the rectory windows. Somewhere in the valley, a church bell began to toll, slow, measured, like a funeral dirge. Drummond stood. "Can you show me where he lived?" "Yes, it is not far." They walked through the village as the winter sun began its early descent behind the mountains. Heinz's apartment was above a closed bakery on the village's single commercial street. Brenner unlocked the door with a key from his pocket. The space was tiny. One room with a narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, a hot plate and a small refrigerator, a crucifix on the wall. No television, no radio. Books lined makeshift shelves, theology texts in 3 languages, histories.
Shoulder. His voice was barely audible. It says, "They are still singing. I hear them in my dreams." Drummond's phone buzzed again. De Vries. She stepped outside to take the call. "Sarah," the Belgian inspector's voice was tight. "We've been going through the preliminary translation. You need to get back here. Now." "What did you find?" Heinz's December 1944 entries. He knew those men were going to die. He didn't just witness it. He participated. He describes meeting someone called Der Alte, the Old One. This person taught Heinz some kind of ritual, told him the forest demanded payment. 7 willing souls to appease it. The translator's voice had gone thin, barely audible over the hum of the Brussels CID office's ventilation system. Sarah Drummond watched his hands tremble as he turned another page of Walter Heinz's journal, the yellowed paper crackling under his careful fingers. "December 26th, 1944, Thomas Verbeke said, his Flemish accent thickening with distress. He was a university archivist, mid-50s, who'd worked with war documents for 3 decades. Sarah had never seen him look shaken. The entry begins simply enough. "Der Alte came to me again last night." Sarah leaned forward, her coffee forgotten, gone cold an hour ago. Beyond the window, evening traffic crawled along Rue de la Loi. Brussels looked ordinary, indifferent. Inside this room, something very old was being excavated. "Keep going," she said. Thomas swallowed. Heinz writes, "He found me in the aid station where I was translating for the wounded. He simply appeared in the doorway, snow on his shoulders, though no snow was falling. He knew my name, knew my mother's maiden name, knew the village in Swabia where my grandparents were born. Villages I myself have never visited." Sarah's pen moved across her notepad. "Der Alte, the Old One, new family history. December 26th, 1 day before patrol vanished. Der Alte told me the forest has been hungry since the fighting began." Thomas continued, his voice dropping. "He said it feeds on war, on suffering, but that a compact exists, an ancient agreement that allows the hunger to be managed." Prince's Campaign, the 100 Years' War. Sarah felt her skin prickle. 600 years. Heinz asks Der Alte how this is possible. The response is, Thomas paused, reading ahead silently, his face losing color. Der Alte tells him that the forest is older than nations, older than Christianity, that beneath the roots of the Bois Jacques lies something that existed before human language, something that feeds on consciousness, on souls that choose to surrender. The compact prevents it from taking entire armies, 7 instead of 7,000.
De Vries spoke from the doorway. "This is the ravings of a traumatized soldier." "Perhaps," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. She thought of the circle, the perfect arrangement, the bodies absorbed into soil in a way that defied every forensic model. "What else does he say?" Thomas turned to December 27th. "The morning of the patrol's departure. Listen. I rose before dawn, unable to sleep. Duralta's words circle in my mind like crows. He told me I have the gift, that my bloodline carries sensitivity to the old ways, that I could save my brothers by offering them true peace, not the mercy of a bullet, but release from everything." Sarah's pen stopped moving. "He's talking about the 7 men. Yes." Thomas's finger traced down the page. He writes, "I have observed them these past weeks. Webb, who stares through people as if already half dead. Donnelly, who weeps in his sleep. Chen, whose hands never stop shaking. Lafayette, who stopped writing letters home because he says there is no home anymore. Kowalski, who speaks of his mother but can't remember her face. Brightwater, who lost his entire squad at Noville. Rosen, who tells jokes but whose eyes are empty." The translator's voice cracked. Hines writes, "These are the 7 most broken, the 7 who would welcome an ending. Duralta says I must prepare them. Speak the old words when I touch them, make them receptive to the forest's call. They will hear it in their dreams tonight. Tomorrow, they will go willingly to the circle." Sarah stood, unable to remain seated. She moved to the window, pressed her palm against the heard and accepted. The same with all 7. They shouldered their rifles. They walked into the forest. And I knew, God forgive me, I knew they would not return. Sarah's hands had formed fists. She forced them open, felt her nails leaving crescents in her palms. "Is there more about what happened to them?" Thomas nodded, turning pages. That night, after the search party found nothing, Hines writes, "I walked alone to the forest edge after dark. I could hear them singing, all 7 voices, harmonizing in the language Duralta taught me. They were not screaming. They were not suffering. They were calling, inviting. The compact was complete. Jesus," De Vries whispered. Thomas continued reading, his voice mechanical now, distancing himself from the words. "Duralta met me at the tree line. He smiled, the first time I'd seen him smile. He said the forest was satisfied, that Easy Company would lose no more men in these woods, that the compact would hold. He said the 7 were not dead, but transformed, absorbed, made part of something eternal. He said they were conscious, aware, singing forever in the roots and the darkness. He said I had given them immortality." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. "Immortality, yes." Thomas turned another page. The next entry is dated January 1945, from the field hospital. "I cannot bear what I've done. I dream of them every night. Webb standing in the circle, smiling, his rifle in his hands. The others around him, the singing that never stops. Duralta visited me again. He says I am part of the compact now, that I must live to bear witness, that I must never speak the truth where it will be believed, but that I must confess endlessly to ensure the guilt prevents me from forgetting." Sarah moved back to the table, leaned over the journal. The handwriting was precise, methodical, the script of a disciplined mind forced to document its own damnation. "The entry ends," Thomas said, "with a single line. Tomorrow I will leave this place. I will find somewhere far from forests and wars. I will live, because that is my punishment. And in 79 years, when I am finally permitted to die, I will arrange for the truth to be discovered." Company's casualty reports from December 1944 through January 1945. The pattern was there, undeniable. Before December 27th, 12 men killed in the Bois-Jacques sector during the Bastogne siege. After December 27th, 0. Not a single Easy Company soldier died in combat in that forest for the remainder of the war, despite continued operations.
The forest had been paid its due. Sarah opened a secure email and began typing to Colonel Reardon at DPAA. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. How did she explain this? A confession to ritual murder by a man claiming he fed 7 soldiers to an ancient entity beneath the forest. It sounded like horror fiction, not a CID report. But the evidence was real. The circle was real. The bodies absorbed into soil were real. And Heinz's journals, corroborated by every verifiable detail, dates, names, locations, were real. She wrote, "Colonel, preliminary translation of Heinz journals reveals direct involvement in patrol's disappearance. Suspect claims participation in ritualistic killing. Details require in-person briefing. Recommend notification to families be delayed pending full investigation." She hit send before she could reconsider. Her phone buzzed. DeVries, texting. The pharmacy records came through. Prescriptions for Wilhelm Alderman, patient DOB listed as 1918. Medications for advanced heart disease, osteoarthritis, degenerative conditions. Last refill November 2023. Brussels address on file. Sarah replied, "First thing tomorrow, full tactical team." She stood, gathered the journal and her notes, locked them in the evidence safe. The office felt oppressive, the walls too close. She needed air, needed to walk, needed to remind herself that the world outside was still normal. The call came through as Sarah drummed her fingers on the scratched surface of her Brussels office desk. Inspector DeVries's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Not urgency exactly, but something colder. Certainty. "We cross-referenced Heinz's journal entries against Easy Company's combat records," he said without preamble. December 27th through May 8th, 1945. The dates he claimed the compact would provide protection. It made her stomach turn. "The ritual worked," she said. "Whatever Heinz and Deralta did, it actually worked. Appears that way." DeVries's keyboard clicked in the background. "I pulled weather records, combat reports, German defensive positions. That sector saw action, heavy machine gun nests, artillery strikes, house-to-house fighting in Foy. Statistically, Easy Company should have taken casualties. They didn't." Sarah thought of Heinz's journal, the careful script documenting his descent into complicity. "I told myself I was offering mercy." But he'd also written something else in those final December entries, something the translator had initially glossed over as theological rambling. She flipped through her notes. There it was. Deralta says the compact provides schutz, protection, for those who remain. 7 souls freely given, 700 spared. The mathematics of salvation through sacrifice. He believed it was necessary, Sarah said. That's how he justified it. 7 men to save the company. Does believing make it true? DeVries asked. Or did they just get statistically lucky for 5 months? Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. The evidence suggested something impossible. That offering 7 soldiers to whatever dwelt beneath the Bois Jacques had created a supernatural shield. But accepting that meant accepting everything else. The entity, the compact, the centuries of orchestrated vanishings. I need the Bastogne post office footage, she said instead. The pickup on December 15th. DeVries's silence stretched too long. Luke? That's why I'm calling. His voice flattened. The footage corrupted. Surveillance system recorded perfectly all morning. People collecting packages, postal workers sorting mail. Then from 1400 to 1447, complete digital corruption. Every camera, every angle. Just snow and pixelated distortion. Equipment malfunction? The technician I consulted says the corruption pattern is unusual. Not hardware failure, not software glitch. The data's there but scrambled, like something interfered with the magnetic encoding. Sarah pulled up the security company's technical report on her second monitor. The footage showed normal operations, then 47 minutes of visual static, then normal operations resuming. The exact back. A promise to whom?
To the 7 dead soldiers? To Der Alte? To himself? She pinned up a new photograph, the modern prescription label from the Brussels pharmacy. Wilhelm Alderman. The same initials as the entity Heinz called Der Alte. Born April 1918, according to the pharmacy database, which would make him 105 years old in 2023. Run the name, she said. Full background. I want addresses, medical records, anything that puts Wilhelm Alderman in a physical location. Already started. De Vries's keyboard clattered. Alderman's prescriptions go back to 2019, all filled at the same Brussels pharmacy. Heart medication, arthritis treatment, blood pressure regulators. Someone very old and very sick. Last refill was November 30th, 2023, 3 weeks before the helmets were discovered. Address? Listing shows Rue de Flandre in Brussels. Apartment 4C. Building manager confirms a tenant by that name, paid rent in cash, rarely seen. Neighbors describe an elderly man who kept to himself. Sarah grabbed her coat. I'm 20 minutes from Rue de Flandre. Get Belgian Federal Police to meet me there. Tactical entry team, full support. Sarah, De Vries's voice stopped her at the door. If this man is who we think he is, if he's the custodian Heinz described, we need to consider what we're walking into. The journals said Der Alte isn't fully human. Then we'll be very careful. Sarah checked her sidearm out of habit, though she doubted bullets would matter if the journals were accurate. But if he planted that jacket, he's our only living link to what happened to those 7 soldiers. I'm not letting him disappear. The line went quiet except for De Vries's breathing. Heinz spent 78 years running from this, he said finally. Maybe we should ask ourselves why. Sarah thought of Catherine Webb, 95 years old, flying across the Atlantic for answers. Of 7 families who'd waited nearly 8 decades for closure. Of the wooden figures inside the helmets, carved with inhuman precision. Because he was complicit, she said. Because knowing the truth meant accepting what he'd done. We're not Heinz. We're investigators. Finding truth is our job, even Or he's waiting. Sarah pulled on a tactical vest marked police. Let's find out. The stairwell smelled of old cooking and damp plaster. Sarah climbed behind 4 officers, their boots echoing in the confined space. At the 4th floor landing, they fanned into position outside apartment 4C. The door was unmarked, painted the same institutional beige as every other unit. No sounds came from inside. No television, no movement, nothing. Lejeune knocked. Police! Wilhelm Alderman! Open the door! Silence. He knocked again, harder. We have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door or we will force entry. Still nothing. Lejeune gestured. 2 officers stepped forward with a battering ram, positioned themselves, and struck the door just below the lock. The frames splintered on the second hit. The apartment exhaled stale air, the smell of unwashed bedding and old newspapers, and something organic Sarah couldn't place. The officers swept through with flashlights, checking each room with practiced efficiency. Clear! Clear! Inspector, you need to see this. Sarah followed the voice into a dim bedroom. Heavy curtains blocked the afternoon sun. The officers had switched on a lamp, revealing a narrow bed with rumpled sheets, a nightstand cluttered with pill bottles, and walls covered in paper. Not wallpaper. Maps. Dozens of hand-drawn maps tacked and taped to every surface, showing the Bois-Jacques forest in obsessive detail. Some looked centuries old, drawn on parchment with careful calligraphy. Others were recent, sketched on modern paper with ballpoint pen. All showed the same feature. Circles marked throughout the forest, each annotated with dates and numbers. December 1356 through 7, November 1796 through 7, September 1916 through 7, December 1944 through 7. Sarah counted 17 circles total. The pattern Heinz's journals had hinted at, laid out in cartographic precision across 8 centuries of forest history. On the nightstand, between prescription bottles, sat a leather-bound ledger. Sarah pulled on evidence gloves and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with names in various languages and scripts: medieval French, German, Latin. Others the forest. And whatever force they were bargaining with had kept its side of the compact. The folklore expert adjusted his reading glasses and leaned forward over the conference table, a tremor in his weathered hands as he examined the photograph of Wilhelm Alderman. "This face," he murmured in French-accented English. "I have seen this face before." Sarah Drummond straightened in her chair, coffee forgotten. Around the table in the Brussels police headquarters, 3 Belgian historians and Inspector de Vries waited. Morning light slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the spread of documents. Heinz's journals, the ledger from the cellar, enlarged prints of the wooden figures. "Where?" Sarah asked. The expert, Dr. Émile Rousseau, was 76, a retired professor from the University of Liège who had spent 40 years collecting Ardennes folklore. He pulled a slim book from his leather satchel, its spine cracked from use. This was published in 1958, interviews with elderly residents of the forest villages, recording their memories of the Great War. He flipped through pages until he found what he wanted, then slid the book across to Sarah. A grainy black and white photograph showed a group of villagers from 1916 standing outside a stone church. The caption identified them as residents of Foy who had fled German artillery. In the back row, half turned from the camera, stood a thin man in dark clothes. "The resemblance is remarkable," Dr. Rousseau said quietly. The woman who identified this photograph for the book, Madame Geneviève Arnaud, told the interviewer that this man was not a villager. She called him Le Gardien des Bois, the guardian of the woods. She said he appeared during battles and disappeared when the killing stopped. "Wilhelm Alderman in 1916, Sarah breathed, looking the same age as in 2023. "There's more." Dr. Rousseau opened a notebook filled with his own handwriting. "In my research, I documented recurring references to a figure associated with the forest. The names change: Guillaume le Vieux, Old Wilhelm, Der Waldmann, but the description remains consistent: an elderly man who tends the forest during wartime. I dismissed it as folklore, a collective personification of death and trauma. Another custodian appeared across centuries. "How is this possible?" de Vries asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Dr. Rousseau removed his glasses, cleaning them with a handkerchief. "You are asking me to explain the impossible. I can only tell you what the old stories say. There are places in Europe, ancient places, where something older than history dwells. The Ardennes forest has been a battlefield for 2,000 years. Romans fought Germanic tribes here. Charlemagne's armies marched through these woods. Every major European war touched this ground." He replaced his glasses. "The folklore suggests that such concentrated violence awakens, or feeds, something that was here before humans built their first fires." The third historian, an archivist named Mark Verbecke, cleared his throat. "There's a practical lead in all this mythology. My grandmother lived in Bastogne her entire life. She died in 2019 at 98. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a voice recording. "Before she passed, I was collecting her memories of the occupation. She told me something I didn't include in my published work because it seemed too fantastical." He played the recording. An elderly woman's voice, speaking Walloon-accented French, filled the room. Mark translated. "She says, when I was a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, my grandmother took me to gather mushrooms. We went too deep in the forest, past where the old logging roads ended. We came to a place where the trees grew wrong, their branches pointing down like they were bowing. My grandmother grabbed my hand and pulled me back. She said we must never go to that place, because the crooked man lived there, the one who tends the old circles. She said he was older than the church, older than Belgium, and he would still be there long after we were dust." The recording continued. "I asked her what he looked like. She said, like a man who has lived too long, who should have died but couldn't. My grandmother warned me he appears during wars, when the forest hungers. Stay away from the circles, she said. Stay away from the crooked man. Mark stopped the recording. After you contacted the university, I called my uncle, my grandmother's son. He still lives in Bastogne. He remembered the story and said he could draw a map of where—
Access this area? De Vries nodded slowly. It's heavily wooded but not impassable. We'd need forestry equipment and a tactical team. The ground will be frozen, but the snow depth is manageable this year. We have thermal imaging drones, Dr. Dubois offered. The museum uses them for battlefield archaeology. If there's a structure, a cellar, a bunker, the temperature differential would show up. Sarah felt the familiar surge of an investigation breaking open. Every case had this moment, when disparate threads suddenly wove together into a pattern. We go tomorrow at first light, full tactical support. If Alderman has been living in these woods for centuries, there could be evidence, artifacts, documents, more ledgers. We need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Dr. Rousseau looked troubled. Agent Drummond, I must ask, what will you do if you find him? If Wilhelm Alderman is not simply a very old man, but something else, something that has orchestrated these sacrifices for 700 years. Sarah met his gaze. Then we document it, photograph it, bring it into the light. Because whatever he is, whatever the forest is, they have taken hundreds of lives. They took 7 American soldiers who deserved to go home. They corrupted Walter Hines into betraying men who trusted him. If there's a way to break this cycle, we find it. And if there isn't, Dr. Rousseau pressed, then at least the families will know the truth, Sarah said quietly. At least Catherine Webb will understand what happened to her brother. That's what I can offer. That's what I have to offer. The meeting broke up with plans to reconvene at dawn. Sarah returned to her temporary office, where the translated sections of Hines's journals lay in neat stacks. She opened to a passage from 1947, 2 years into his Swiss exile. I dreamed again of Marcus Webb. He stands in the circle with his men, and they are singing. It is not a song of joy. They are not at peace. Their Alta lied to me. The forest does not grant mercy. It consumes. They are conscious, trapped, feeding the roots with their endless terror. I hear them every night, screaming in a language I taught them to speak. I am responsible for an eternity of suffering. Sarah closed the journal. And steady. Iowa farm boy who survived Bastogne's siege only to walk willingly into a trap set by forces beyond comprehension. I'm coming for answers, Sarah told the photograph. For you. For all of them. Outside, night settled over Brussels. In the Bois Jacques forest, 50 kilometers away, wind moved through twisted pines that grew in circles, their branches bowing down as if in perpetual grief. The ground beneath those circles held secrets, measured not in decades, but in centuries. And tomorrow, Sarah would begin to excavate them all. The drone's thermal camera painted the forest floor in shades of orange and blue. Sarah Drummond watched the tablet screen, her breath misting in the December cold. Beside her, Inspector De Vries coordinated with the tactical team spread through the Bois Jacques. 8 officers, forestry experts, the amateur historian Mark Verbeke who'd provided the location. There, Verbeke said, pointing at a dark blue anomaly on the screen. That depression, see? Lower temperature than surrounding Earth. The drone operator adjusted altitude. The thermal signature sharpened, a rectangular shape beneath centuries of leaf litter and deadfall, maybe 10 feet by 12. Sarah checked her service weapon, a habit more than necessity. Send the team in. The tactical officers approached on foot, their movements careful between the twisted pines. This section of forest felt wrong even through the drone feed. The trees grew at odd angles, their trunks curved like arthritic fingers. No birds, no deer trails, just silence. Officer Toussaint reached the depression first. He cleared away branches with gloved hands,
then stopped. "Inspector, we have stonework." Sarah and DeVries moved forward, leaving Verbeca with the equipment. The forest pressed close. Sarah's boots crunched through frozen underbrush that hadn't been disturbed in years, maybe decades. The trees here were ancient. She'd learned enough to recognize oaks that predated Napoleon, pines from before the Great War. The stone structure emerged as the team worked, not a bunker or pillbox. The masonry was older, cruder. Hand-cut limestone blocks forming a low arch, half-collapsed but unmistakable. A cellar entrance. Medieval construction.
15 feet across, the ceiling lost in shadow. Her light swept the space. Shelves lined the walls. Hundreds of wooden figures stared back at her. They were crude but deliberate, each carved from a single piece of wood. Human forms with arms raised, mouths open. The same design as the figures found in the helmets. Some looked fresh, the wood pale and unseasoned. Others were black with age, crumbling at the edges. "Mother of God," DeVries whispered behind her. The team filed in, their flashlights multiplying the shadows. Toussaint photographed everything. Another officer took measurements. Sarah moved deeper into the cellar, her pulse steady, despite the crawling sensation between her shoulder blades. A wooden table stood against the far wall. On it, a ledger. The book was massive, bound in leather gone brittle with age. Sarah pulled on latex gloves and opened it carefully. The first page bore text in Latin. She couldn't read it, but she recognized dates: 1356, 1411, 1523. She turned pages. The handwriting changed every few entries, shifting from Gothic script to later styles. Different languages appeared: medieval French, German, Flemish dialects she couldn't identify. But the structure remained consistent. Each entry listed 7 names, followed by a date and location. "Toussaint, I need photos of every page." She kept turning. The entries marched through centuries. 1689, 7 French soldiers. 1796, 7 Austrian cavalry. 1814, 7 Prussian infantry. September 1916, 7 names with French ranks. Her hand stopped at December 1944. 27 December 1944. Bois-Jacques B. Bastogne. Webb, Marcus E. Sergeant, USA. Donnelly, James M. Corporal, USA. Chen, Robert H. Private, USA. Lafayette, Eugene C. Private, USA. Kowalski, Samuel J. Private, USA. Brightwater, Thomas R. Private, USA. Rosen, David L. Private, USA. Ritual Vollendet, Der Vertrag ist erfüllt. Ritual complete. Concentrator, unplugged but recently used, based on the dust patterns. Sarah picked up one of the bottles. Metoprolol, prescribed to Wilhelm Alderman, filled November 18, 2023. The Brussels pharmacy address matched the one from the raid planning. "He was living here," she said. "Recently." Toussaint called from the opposite corner. "Inspector, there's more." Another table, smaller than the first. On it, a modern composition notebook, the kind sold at any stationery shop. Sarah opened it. The handwriting was shaky but legible. German, dated November 30, 2023. DeVries read over her shoulder, translating. "I am the 23rd custodian. My health fails. The line must continue. I have prepared the one who will be 24th, as Der Alta prepared me in 1899. The forest must feed. The compact must endure." Sarah turned pages. The entries described a ritual, how to select the willing, how to mark the ground, the words to speak in the old language that predated Latin, instructions for maintaining the ledger, lists of supplies needed. The final entry was dated December 8, 2023. "Tomorrow I go to the city for the last time," DeVries translated.
My body weakens, but the transfer is complete. The 24th knows his duty. When I die, he will collect Heinz's confession from the postbox and place it at the 1944 circle, as I instructed Heinz 79 years ago. The revelation will come. Investigators will search. They will not understand. The compact is older than understanding. Sarah closed the notebook. Her mind worked through implications, connections. The package at the post office, Heinz's jacket and photo. It wasn't Alderman who collected it. He was already dying. It was his successor, the 24th custodian, DeVries said, who was young enough, healthy enough to walk into a post office, retrieve a package, and plant evidence in the forest. Sarah looked around the cellar, at the shelves of figures, the ancient ledger, the modern prescriptions. Someone Alderman trained before he got too sick to continue. Toussaint's camera flashed, documenting the scene. The light painted the wooden figures in stark relief, their raised arms casting shadows.
Verbeke stood by the equipment, his face pale. "Did you find?" "Everything," Sarah said, "and confirmation that it's not over." She walked 20 feet from the cellar entrance and held up her phone. One bar of signal appeared. She sent the text to Reardon, then called Brussels headquarters. "This is Drummond. I need a priority search on pharmacy records. Patient name Wilhelm Alderman, Brussels area. Any prescriptions filled in the last 3 months." She paused, watching officers carry evidence bags up from the cellar. "Also pull surveillance footage from the Bastogne post office for December 15th. I want facial recognition on every person who entered the building that day." The 24th custodian had a face. He'd walked through a post office, touched a package, left traces. Modern surveillance didn't care about ancient compacts. Sarah ended the call as DeVries emerged from the cellar, carrying the massive ledger in his gloved hands. It looked impossibly old in the winter light. "We'll need specialists," he said. "Medieval historians, linguists, carbon dating for the earliest entries. And a warrant for every pharmacy in Brussels," Sarah added. "Alderman had to get his prescriptions somewhere. Pharmacies keep records. Someone filled those orders, saw his face, maybe made small talk. You think the successor came with him? Helped him when he got too sick? I think Alderman needed help the last few months of his life. Someone had to carry his oxygen, drive him places, handle physical tasks." Sarah looked back at the cellar entrance. Someone he trusted completely. Someone he taught the whole ritual to before he died. Her breath fogged in the cold as she squared her shoulders and followed the team back into the trees. The interrogation room at Saint-Pierre Hospital smelled like antiseptic and dying flowers. Sarah Drummond sat across from Wilhelm Alderman, watching the old man's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision beneath the oxygen mask. His wrists, thin as dried kindling, bore restraint cuffs, a formality that seemed absurd given his condition. Inspector DeVries stood by the door, his hand resting near his sidearm despite the obvious futility. The preliminary medical assessment lay in Sarah's folder. Cardiac arrhythmia, advanced pulmonary fibrosis, centuries of names, always in groups of 7. "We found your records. We have Walter Heinz's confession. We know what you are. Do you?" A wheeze interrupted him. He adjusted the oxygen flow with skeletal fingers. "Enlighten me then. What am I?" "A serial facilitator of murder." Sarah leaned forward. "You've been involved in the deaths of hundreds of soldiers across multiple wars. You manipulated Walter Heinz into selecting 7 American men for ritual sacrifice in 1944. You've maintained this pattern for centuries." Alderman's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a younger face. "Centuries, yes, though your arithmetic is conservative." He gestured weakly toward the window, where afternoon light filtered through Brussels' industrial haze. "My family has tended the circles since the Black Death reshaped Europe. 23 generations, each custodian trained by his predecessor, each inheriting the burden of the compact." "The compact?" Sarah's pen hovered over her notepad. "Explain it."
It is an agreement older than your language has words to describe. Alderman's breathing grew labored. A nurse stepped forward, but De Vries waved her back. The entity beneath the Bois Jacques, beneath many forests where men have spilled blood in industrial quantities. It was ancient when Rome fell. It feeds on souls, Agent Drummond. That is simply its nature, as a wolf feeds on deer. Sarah forced herself to remain still, professional. And you feed it people. I channel its hunger. The correction came sharp despite his weakness. Without the compact, the forest would take thousands. Entire battalions swallowed by the pines, their bodies never found, their souls consumed in random, terrible fashion. The compact offers structure, precision, 7 willing souls during each great conflict, taken in proper ritual, and the entity is satisfied. It confines its feeding to the sacrifice circle. The surrounding armies pass through unharmed. Willing. Sarah's voice hardened. Walter Heinz's journals describe how you taught him words in a pre-linguistic tongue, how he spoke them when he shook those 7 men's hands, making them receptive to the forest's call. That's not willing. That's merely opened their perception, made them aware of the choice. They heard the singing from the circle, the ancient song that predates human language but resonates in the oldest parts of our consciousness. And they chose to go. They chose to walk into that clearing, to arrange themselves in the pattern, to let the forest embrace them. Sarah's pen snapped between her fingers. They're not at peace. Heinz's final journals describe hearing them scream in his dreams, conscious, trapped, feeding the thing beneath the soil for eternity. Alderman's expression didn't change. Peace is subjective. They no longer suffer the war. They no longer carry the weight of killing, of watching friends die, of fearing tomorrow. Their consciousness has been redistributed, absorbed into something greater than themselves. Some might call that transcendence. Some might call it hell. Perhaps. He coughed wetly into the oxygen mask. The nurse stepped forward again, checking monitors. But I did not invent the compact, Agent Drummond. I merely inherited it, as my father did, as his father did before him. The entity existed long before human ethics developed concepts like murder and consent. It will exist long after your civilization crumbles to dust. The compact is not perfect. It is simply necessary. Sarah pulled another photograph from her folder, the pharmacy records showing prescriptions for Wilhelm Alderman, dated back to 2015. You told the pharmacist you were born in 1918. That would make you 105 years old. But you also told Walter Heinz you were the 23rd custodian in a line going back to 1356. The mathematics don't work. Don't they? His eyes gleamed. Perhaps the compact offers benefits to those who uphold it faithfully. Perhaps time moves differently for custodians. Perhaps you are asking questions whose answers would shatter the small, rational universe you've constructed in your mind. De Vries spoke for the first time. We found 14 other circles marked in your ledger, dating back to 1356, like Agent Drummond said. The 100 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, the Great War. Each time 7 soldiers vanish without trace in that forest. Always 7. Always in winter. Always near the solstice. Carried German blood and Lutheran mysticism in his heritage. He was perfect. I approached him after Bastogne, when his spirit was raw from witnessing the siege. I taught him the words. I showed him mercy was possible even in war's heart. You manipulated a traumatized 24-year-old translator into selecting 7 men for death. Sarah's voice shook despite her control. You poisoned him with guilt that drove him into 7 decades of exile and self-torture. I gave him a choice. Alderman's breathing grew more labored. The monitor beside his bed began chiming warnings. As the 7 soldiers had a choice. As I had a choice when my father, the 22nd custodian, taught me the ritual on his deathbed in 1943.
The compact continues because each generation chooses to continue it. Because the alternative, allowing the entity to feed without constraint, would be catastrophic. Convenient rationalization, but Sarah felt doubt creeping through her certainty. The statistical anomaly of Easy Company's 0 deaths after December 27th. The 17 circles the ground-penetrating radar had revealed, each surrounded by forest where local memory avoided the ground. What happens if someone breaks the compact, salts the earth, cuts the trees, refuses to select new victims? The old man's smile returned, gentler now. It has been tried. In 1789, during the Terror, French rationalists burned a circle near Verdun, declaring it superstition. That winter, an entire regiment vanished in the forest. 400 men, gone in a single night, their screams heard in Metz 15 kilometers away. In 1872, German foresters attempted to clear-cut the Bois Jacques. They found their workers dead in a perfect spiral, each man's mouth open as if singing, their bodies already beginning to merge with the root systems. The monitor's chiming grew insistent. 2 nurses entered, checking Alderman's vitals with practiced efficiency. One whispered to DeVries, "Inspector, he's deteriorating rapidly. We need to stabilize him." Sarah raised her hand. 2 more questions. Who retrieved the package from the Bastogne post office? Who planted Walter Heinz's jacket at the circle? Alderman's eyes drifted toward the window, where clouds gathered over Brussels' rooftops. The 24th custodian exists outside your jurisdiction. The compact will continue, Agent Drummond. When the next great war comes, and it will come, humans cannot help themselves. The 24th custodian will find his Walter Heinz. He will select 7 willing souls. The circle will open. The entity will feed. And another generation of soldiers will pass through those forests unharmed, saved by a sacrifice they will never know. The secure ward of Brussels University Hospital smells like antiseptic and institutional fear. Wilhelm Alderman lies in the narrow bed like a monument to impossible age, his skin translucent as parchment stretched over ancient wood. The oxygen cannula in his nostrils hisses with mechanical rhythm. His eyes, roomy but alert, fix on Sarah Drummond with something approaching satisfaction. "You found my home," he says in French so archaic the interpreter beside Sarah hesitates before translating. "I wondered how long it would take." Sarah pulls a chair to his bedside. Inspector DeVries positions himself by the door, arms crossed, skeptical of everything except the shackles on the old man's wrist. The hospital security camera blinks its red eye from the ceiling corner. "Wilhelm Alderman," Sarah begins. "Born in what year exactly?" The old man's laugh comes out as a wheeze. "Your records say 1918. The truth is older than your grandmother's grandmother. Does it matter? I am dying. The compact passes on. Your investigation changes nothing. Tell me about Walter Heinz." Alderman's expression softens. "A good man. A broken man. The war had hollowed him out, filled him with guilt he did not deserve. American soldiers treated him differently. Always the German, always suspect. He wanted to believe in something greater than the ugliness he witnessed at Bastogne." Sarah leans forward. "You manipulated him. You taught him words he didn't understand, and convinced him 7 men had to die. Not die," Alderman's correction carries the weight of absolute certainty. "Transform. Join. Feed the compact that has protected these forests through 23 generations of my family. The entity beneath does not kill. It accepts offerings. There is a difference your modern mind refuses to grasp. Those men are dead, their bodies dissolved into the soil." Alderman coughs, a wet rattle deep in his chest. "The forests of Ardennes sit atop something older than Christianity, older than Rome. It was here when the Celts worshipped trees, and it will be here when your civilization crumbles. It feeds on the souls of warriors. Without the compact, without the circles to channel that hunger, it takes indiscriminately. Entire armies vanish. Villages empty overnight." He gestures weakly toward the table beside his bed.
The ledger you found. 17 circles, yes? Each one marks a feeding point. 7 souls per circle, offered during times of great violence. In return, the forests remain stable. The entity's hunger focuses on the willing few instead of consuming thousands. You're insane, De Vries says from the doorway. Insanity would be denying the evidence before you. Alderman's voice strengthens. Your forensic experts cannot explain the decomposition rate. Your historians cannot explain why my name appears in records across centuries. Your medical examiner will find my biology impossible. Yet here I am. Here it is. The compact endures because reality demands it. Sarah forces her voice to remain steady. Walk me through December 1944. How did you select Heinz? I did not select him. The blood selected him. His grandmother's line traced back to Hesse, to families who kept similar compacts in the German forests. He carried the sensitivity in his veins. I merely awakened it. And the 7 soldiers? Alderman closes his eyes, remembering. I instructed Heinz to observe his company, find the men already broken by combat, those teetering on the edge of psychological collapse. Sergeant Webb had watched too many friends die. Donnelly's hands shook constantly. Chen jumped at every sound. Lafayette wept in his sleep. Kowalski spoke of suicide. Brightwater prayed for death. Rosen wrote final letters to his mother every night, certain he would not survive. So you preyed on trauma. I offered mercy. The war would have killed them eventually, slowly and painfully, or sent them home as hollow shells. The circle granted them peace. The forest sings to those who carry unbearable weight. Heinz whispered the awakening words, simple phrases in the first tongue.
Every detail matters. The compact has rules older than memory. The heart monitor beside Alderman's bed accelerates. A nurse enters, checks his vitals, adjusts an IV drip. Sarah waits until they're alone again. What about the other circles, the ones we haven't found yet? All through the Ardennes, deeper in France, some in Germany. Wherever great battles soak the earth with blood and desperation, the compact manifests. Different families, same obligation. We communicate rarely, pass knowledge through coded letters and pilgrimages. The 23rd custodian of Bois-Jacques knows the 19th custodian of Verdun, who knew the 12th custodian of Agincourt. The chain remains unbroken. And now? Sarah's hands clench. You said you're the 23rd. Who's the 24th? For the first time, Alderman smiles. Already selected, already taught, already waiting for the next great war, the next 7 willing souls. You will not find them. The custodian learns to hide in plain sight, to seem ordinary until the forests call for payment. I will find them. No, Agent Drummond, you will not. His smile fades. I have lived 105 years in this body, and 3 times that in the memories passed down from my predecessors. The compact grants long life to those who serve it faithfully, but it also grants knowledge of the world's deeper truths. Your laws cannot touch what sustains itself on cosmic hunger. Your prisons cannot hold what exists between the living world and the spaces beneath. You can expose me, execute me, burn every record I kept. The 24th custodian will continue the work, because the work must continue. The monitor alarm sounds. Alderman's breathing labors. A doctor rushes in, pushing Sarah aside. Out, the doctor orders. He's decompensating. Sarah and De Vries retreat to the hallway. Through the window, they watch the medical team work frantically over the old man's failing body. Do you believe any of that? De Vries asks quietly. Sarah thinks of the impossible forensics, the inexplicable historical records, the soil analysis showing 7 distinct human isotope signatures absorbed into earth like water into sand. I believe he suffering from advanced dementia and multiple organ failures, who exhibited extremely rare genetic abnormalities. His confessions regarding Walter Heinz and the 1944 disappearances are entered into evidence. The case is marked resolved by confession, though many questions remain classified. 2 days later, Sarah stands in Arlington National Cemetery as 7 flag-draped coffins are lowered into the earth. Catherine Webb, 95 years old and fierce despite her frailty, watches her brother Marcus finally come home. The soil from the Belgian circle has been divided into 7 portions, sealed into 7 urns, placed with military precision into 7 graves. Catherine grips Sarah's hand afterward, her fingers surprisingly strong. "Did he suffer?" she asks. At the end, Sarah thinks about telling her the sanitized version. Instead, she chooses something closer to truth. "I think he found what he was looking for. Whether that was peace or something else, I honestly don't know." Catherine nods slowly. "Marcus wrote me a letter before he shipped out. Said he'd been dreaming about a forest where soldiers went to rest. I thought it was just combat nerves. Now I wonder if he knew, somehow. If they all knew." She releases Sarah's hand and places a single white rose on Marcus's grave. The other 6 families do the same for their men. 7 white roses against the manicured grass. Sarah returns to Brussels. The case officially closes. The Bois Jacques site is consecrated as a war grave, cordoned off, protected from further investigation by international treaty and Belgian heritage law. The cellar is sealed. The ledger is catalogued into classified archives. For 3 weeks, Sarah tries to return to normal casework. Bank frauds, art thefts, desertion investigations from Iraq and Afghanistan. Then the package arrives. April 18th, 2024. Morning mail delivery to the CID Brussels office. A single unmarked envelope addressed to Agent Sarah Drummond, bearing no return address, sits among the day's correspondence.